Segment 5 concluded with the question, why would anyone want to leave Bavaria? It was such an idyllic and fairy tale land. The death of their king was a factor. Ludwig II died in the year 1886. He was just 40 years old. The cause of death was listed as a drowning accident, but Ludwig had always been a strong swimmer, and the lake where he was found was only waist deep, raising suspicions that he may have been murdered. And once he had died, Bavaria came under the rule of Berlin. And in that year, the ruler of Berlin was Otto von Bismarck, the chancellor. The Kaiser had not recuperated yet. The premature death of their king caused many Bavarians to go into panic. So to answer the question, why would they leave? I suspect that many people, like my great-grandfather, did not want their sons to go to war or on behalf of the Kaiser and the Prussians, whom they hated. And they'd heard many stories about what life was like in America. It sounded like Bavaria with all of the good parts and none of the bad. So they had known this day was coming. They suspected Otto von Bismarck of foul play. This was confirmed a few years later when one of the maids who worked in the palace swore under oath that she found 2 bullet holes in the back of the shirt that Ludwig was wearing that day. This is an artist depiction of German immigrants boarding a ship for America in the 1880s. The title says German immigrants, but probably the majority were Bavarian immigrants who were anxious to get out before things got worse. This was 13 years after the 1871 treaty, which unified Germany. And now that their king was dead, Kaspar, our great-grandfather, decided to pack it up and set sail for America. That kind of looks like great-grandfather Kaspar and his wife Mary Louise trying to herd their kids into the perhaps steerage section of this overcrowded ship. In the summer of 1884, Kaspar and his family made the Atlantic crossing. This also confirms to me that they must have had some money. It wasn't cheap to sail. With a family this large, 7 kids, 2 adults, plus they would need money once they got to America. So we can't say for certain, but I am guessing that this was Kaspar's life savings, that he had given up everything in order to make a better life for his family in America. And on that Atlantic crossing, Teresa, born in 1878, died from diphtheria and was buried at sea. And then Regina, our grandfather's twin sister, died also from diphtheria and also buried at sea. When Kaspar and Mary arrived in New York, probably Ellis Island, they came with 5 children, 1 girl and 4 boys. Catherine was the oldest. She was 15 years old when they arrived in New York. And then Martin, age 14, Ambrose, age 9. Our grandfather Anton was 8 years old when he arrived in America, and baby John was only 3 years old. Now, there were 2 Engelhaupts, 2 brothers, our great-grandfather and his brother, who escaped to Nebraska before the king died. They came here in 1884. The king died in 1886. The first brother was Michael Anton, and then our great-grandfather Kaspar. Michael Anton was born in 1837 in Bavaria, and Kaspar born in 1841. I think that Michael Anton arrived in 1883 or earlier, and Kaspar, we know, arrived in 1884. I'm guessing that Michael had arrived earlier and had sent letters back to his younger brother telling him what a great place it was in South Dakota, and that indeed land was free. Michael became a homesteader. He died in 1912 at age 75. His younger brother Kaspar died in 1918 at age 77. Both men are buried in Boyd County, although in separate cemeteries. Michael Antone had a son that he named Kaspar after his brother, and Kaspar had a son that he named Antone Michael, and that would be our grandfather Antone. This is a rare photograph of Michael Antone, the older of the two brothers. This is found on a website called Find a Grave, and the bottom from the same website shows Kaspar and his wife Mary at their homestead in Boyd, Nebraska. Michael Antone had 7 kids. Kaspar and Mary had 7 kids, although only 5 of them survived the Atlantic crossing. Michael Antone had 31 grandkids. Kaspar and Mary had 28, making a total of 59 first-generation Engelhaupts, all in South Dakota and Nebraska. And in total, at one point, including the adults, there were 63 Engelhaupts in Nebraska and South Dakota. I'm assuming that after Michael arrived in New York City, he could have stumbled over any number of leaflets that are spread by young boys working for the various land and railroad companies. He may have been staying in an apartment with a landlady who could read English, but he probably could not read or write English. However, there was one word he could understand in English, and that is the word free. Here is a land offer. This is one of those flyers that would be distributed in the large cities like New York City, Philadelphia, perhaps Chicago. And in the fine print, what it says is farms of fertile prairie land to be had free of cost. It says simply by occupying it. This was part of the Homestead Act. If you occupied the land and built a structure and maintained it for at least 6 years, you would be given a deed of title. And these flyers littered the streets of New York City. A similar land offer from the Burlington Railroad of 1872, millions of acres of land in Iowa and Nebraska. It says that the products, meaning the product of farming, will pay for the land and the improvements, because this land was not free. It was 30 cents an acre. The reason being that Nebraska was a state. The Dakota territories were not yet a state. But since Nebraska land was not free, Michael chose the Dakota territories. He arrived in South Dakota, I'm assuming in 1883. Kaspar arrived in 1885. Here's a very interesting photograph from that year, 1885. It shows German farmers working a threshing machine. The style seems to be that these Germans all came to the same place at the same time, and the way to survive was to help each other, and through mutual assistance and mutual benefit they managed to scrape out a living. These German homesteaders in the territories, this could have been a photograph of our great-grandfather Kaspar, or maybe that's Michael standing at the end of this threshing machine. Returning to great-grandfather Kaspar and his wife Mary, here they are standing in front of their homestead in Nebraska. So apparently they had made enough money in South Dakota to purchase a homestead under the Homesteading Act. It was still in effect. The photograph was taken around 1910, it's believed. And when Kaspar left South Dakota, he didn't just abandon his homestead, he put it in charge of his favorite son, Anton, our grandfather. If the photograph was taken in 1910, Mary died a year later in 1911. This photograph also must have been taken prior to 1911. And in it we see our great-grandfather Anton. Next to him is Martin, and then Katie, the oldest of the kids, and then John. Ambrose is not shown in this photograph. We see Kaspar wearing two medals on his chest, and I've asked other experts, and they surmise that those medals might have been from the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, when Prussia went to war with Austria, the 7 Weeks' War. Kaspar would have been 25 years old, and even though he was Bavarian, he was probably conscripted into this war, perhaps even against his will, because Bavaria and Austria are culturally very similar. If that's the case, if these medals are from that war of 1866, he would have served under Wilhelm, then General Wilhelm, later King of Prussia, and later Kaiser Wilhelm. So he would have known what it was like to have been a soldier in the Prussian army. The photo would have been taken 2 years before he met Mary and they got married. Much later, this photograph must have been taken between 1911 and 1918 when Kaspar died, showing great-great-grandfather Kaspar with 5 of his grandchildren, and these are probably John's kids who had been born in Seward, Nebraska. And these would be 5 of the 28 cousins in common with my father and my uncles. Just to point out, John had a son named Leo, and Leo had a son named Thomas, who was born a year later than I was. So there are 2 Tom Engelhaupts from Nebraska, 1 year apart. I bet that's confusing for people who are trying to track us down. Just to point out that my father and my uncle Bob were born after Kaspar died, so they never would have known their grandfather Kaspar. Both Michael Engelhaupt and Kaspar Engelhaupt are buried in Boyd County, just outside of Spencer. 2 different cemeteries, and Kaspar and his wife Mary are buried in the Baker Cemetery. Michael is buried in the Butte Cemetery. This is the headstone for great-grandfather Kaspar and his wife Mary Louise, our great-grandmother, showing her year of birth and her death in 1911, and then Kaspar, year of birth, and his death in 1918. This concludes the first part. I hope to put together another section which will take up the life of Anton, our grandfather, he and his brothers, and what developed after 1920 up until the 1950s.